my topic for tonight is about futuristic fertility and the Halachic conundrums. We are, as with AI, we are on the cusp of the most phenomenal progress in human development. If you look at the developments in medicine over the last few centuries, it is not a linear. It's not a linear growth. It's not even exponential. It's double exponential. We are advancing at the most phenomenal rate, and one of the most rapid advancements is in stem cell research and the use of that in creating new beings. Not talking now about alien beings in another planet. I'm talking about human beings in this planet. And those of you who saw, I sent out an article which was in the Jerusalem Post last month, which was not written by me or by Rabbi Wise. It was written by somebody else who I didn't even write down here. But basically, it was an article which is entitled "Israeli Scientists Grow Human Embryo Models from Stem Cells," which means that somebody has taken a cell, a stem cell. Stem cell is a cell which has the ability to develop into all sorts of different types of tissue. They've taken a stem cell and they have managed to grow this stem cell into a human embryo model up to 14 days of development of the human embryo. Now that is unbelievable for us, because that is the beginning of the creation of a human being from a stem cell. I have a friend who we've all been davening for the last few months, lives in Ramat Bet Shemesh now, who developed a condition called multiple myeloma, which is basically a cancer of the bone cells. And he has been treated in the Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem. And basically, he was given chemotherapy to wipe out his entire bone marrow, completely wiped it out. And then they took stem cells and injected these stem cells into him. And within 6 weeks, his bone marrow had regenerated. He had to be 6 weeks in a complete bubble because he had no immunity at all, 0 white cells. But he came out of this bubble. His white cells were normal. There's no sign of the myeloma whatsoever. I saw him at the beginning of his illness. I thought I was going to say goodbye to him. He looked so bad. I saw him about 2 weeks ago. He's lost a few inches in height because his bones have crumbled during the illness time, but he looks great. He's out walking 10 kilometers a day. This is all from stem cells. And the research is showing that now we can do all these things. And this one here is what I'm interested in today. Because this tells us that in the not too distant future, and the rate of progress we're going really is in the not too distant future, we're going to be able to make human beings from stem cells. That human being will not necessarily, probably at first, it will be implanted into a woman's uterus and will grow in the uterus after it's been created. But there'll come a time when they can reproduce the medium of a uterus. That can't be very far away either, some kind of incubator type machine where we won't need a uterus either. But let's just take for the moment the situations that we have where we have what is basically a clone. Okay, you take a cell and you make it into another human being. Now, this question was first addressed by the rabbis back in the 1990s. I think it was 1999, but I could be wrong on that. So don't quote me on the date. There was a creation up in Edinburgh, in Scotland, of a certain Dolly the sheep. Okay, Dolly the sheep was the first cloned mammal. Okay, they took a cell from a white sheep, and they cloned this cell. I won't go into the science of it. They put it into the uterus of a black sheep, and when the baby sheep was delivered, lo and behold, it was an exact copy of the white sheep from which they'd taken the cell. And that was the first cloned mammal. And at that time, the chief rabbi of the Commonwealth was Rabbi Lord Emanuel Jakubowicz, who was, as well as being the chief rabbi of the UK Commonwealth, was also known as the father of Jewish medical ethics. He was the first rabbi in modern times to deal with Jewish medical ethics, largely because it was on his watch, as it were, that these things started to become important. And he was asked a halachic shaila back in the 90s. Thinking about it, it must have been earlier than 99, because Rabbi Sachs became chief rabbi in 91. Anyway, whenever it was in that sort of period. He was asked the question, is it halachically permissible to create a cloned human being? Because if you can clone a sheep, it isn't very far to be able to clone a human being. A human being is a mammal, same as a sheep. It should be possible, and technically is possible. This is even one step even further. But can you clone a human being halachically? What? And you know what his answer was? Anybody know what Rabbi Jakubowicz said? No, he didn't say yeah. He said, fascinating, he said, not yet. Meaning that, and he expanded on the answer, of course. What he meant was, and what he said was, that there is no physical act involved in the cloning of a human being which is forbidden. Famously, the question was asked about artificial insemination. Okay, one of the very first fertility techniques of the 20th century, which was used to treat infertility, was artificial insemination. So you take the sperm of a donor and you inseminate a woman with the sperm of somebody else. And artificial insemination by donor, as opposed to artificial insemination by husband, was questioned right at the beginning of these techniques of infertility treatment, was questions as to whether that was permitted because of mamzeros, because is this a mamzer? Will the child from an artificially inseminated woman with donor sperm, would that be a mamzer? A mamzer is the result of an illicit relationship, a sexual relationship which is not permitted by the Torah. A child from that relationship is a mamzer. It is not a bastard child born out of wedlock, as the traditional understanding of the English word bastard is. It's often translated like that, but it's not correct. A mamzer is the result of a forbidden relationship. Now, Rabbi Moshe Tendler, who was the son-in-law of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, he famously said, you cannot commit adultery with a hypodermic syringe. Okay? So in other words, the child of an artificially inseminated woman with donor sperm is not a mamzer, because there is no act of a forbidden act which is being taking place. So if you apply all of those ideas to the concept of cloning, which is you take a cell and you take out the nuclear material and you pop in the nuclear material of some other cell, and then you pop that into the uterus of we're talking about people, so a uterus of a woman, and you get the baby who has the DNA, exact DNA of the donor nucleus that you put into that cell. Where's the forbidden act? There isn't one. There is no forbidden act. So Rabbi Jakubowicz said that there is no halachic problem with cloning a human being. But he said we shouldn't do it. And he quoted the most brilliant reason for it. When we celebrate Shabbat, what do we celebrate? We celebrate Shabbat Vayinafash. HaKadosh Baruch Hu stopped creating. Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu stop creating after 6 days? Was he tired? Did he need to put his feet up? Did he want a bowl of cholent? None of those things. He could have carried on creating, but he chose to stop, even though he had the ability to carry on. When we celebrate Shabbat, what we're celebrating is the fact that we as human beings spend 6 days creating, working, advancing, and then on the 7th day, we stop creating, even though we're able to continue. And Rabbi Jakubowicz says, at this point, and he was talking then, at this point, we don't have the answers to the moral questions of whether we should have cloned human beings. And we're going to talk about, for a few minutes about the various different problems that we have if we have cloned human beings. But what he was saying, actually, if you think about this, was fundamentally exactly the same as what Rabbi Wise was saying, and to a degree, what Rav Mendel was saying. And that is that you can have all the clever machinery in the world. You can have this AI that knows the whole of Shas and knows the whole of the Rambam, etc., etc. But it's got no neshama. It's got no ethics. It's got no morals. Okay, I can tell you as a doctor, and there are 1 or 2 people in here who will probably be able to confirm this, that when I was in practice, I was by no means was I the cleverest doctor in my practice. I was not the one that knew the most medicine, but I was the one, and I'm telling you this to blow my own trumpet, I'm really not. I was the one that had the longest waiting list. Why? Because I was the one that had the good so-called bedside manner. I was the one that people could relate to, and I could relate to them. I had a colleague who was very, very clever, but he lacked some social skills. Much cleverer than me, but people didn't want to see him because he wasn't socially adept. And that is something that a machine cannot get. An AI machine cannot have that bedside manner, that knowledge of, as Rabbi Wise said, that knowledge of the background of the person you're dealing with. That AI machine doesn't know when the person comes in to ask them how their holiday was in Spain 3 weeks ago, because you'd made a little note in your records that they were going to Spain last time you saw them. Right? Now that goes a long way to build confidence in a relationship. Machinery doesn't do that, however clever it is. And this is the same thing that Rabbi Jakubowicz was saying about these clone things. We don't yet have the answers to the moral questions. The Halachic conundrum that we have with this kind of thing is that there are various things that we need to do in Halacha which are dependent on our parentage. So, for example, Kohen. Any Kohanim here? There we go. Why are you a Kohen, sir? Because your father is a Kohen. Okay. What if you were cloned? Right? What if you were cloned? Let me ask this question more basically. Who is the father of the cloned human being? So let me say, you take a cell from me. You take a cell from me and you put my DNA material into an egg that's come from somebody else. And you put that egg into somebody else's uterus. Okay? And that person gives birth to this baby. And that baby is going to look like me because it's got my DNA. So who is that baby's father? Is it me? I'm not his father. Is my father that baby's father? Okay. So why is that father? So that depends how you define father. Okay. Is the father, halachically, is the father the person that produced the Y chromosome for that child? In which case, I'm the father because I produced that Y chromosome for that child. Okay. Let's take the mother. That's a worse question. Who is the mother of this child? Is it the woman that gave birth to the child? Or is it my mother? My mother was the one that gave me my X chromosome. And so Therefore, maybe this cloned baby is a mother, or maybe that my mother is the baby's grandmother, because so you can see that there are all sorts of problems here as to parentage. Okay, so what's the problem with that? Well, you have a mitzvah of kibbud av va'em. You have halachot of Yerusha, of inheritance. Those are rather important. And as you're well aware, many arguments and fallings out and foribbles in families have been caused by Yerusha. Imagine you have this. You have somebody comes along, right? My little clone is born to somebody else there. My kids are going to come along and say, hang on a minute, you don't get a share in the Yerusha. Why should you have your? You're not a child of. But hang on a minute, it's got my DNA in it. It's my pure DNA. My children only got half of my DNA in it. So maybe they should have the whole lot because he's just like me. So you can see all these problems here. So let's take the mother. The mother, then we've got a problem with the mother because then you've got yichud problems. Okay, how are you going to deal with the issue of a person? The opposite sex not being allowed to be in close contact with somebody who's not their child. So you've got to know who your child is. So these problems of parentage is a very important thing as far as halacha is concerned. Now, these questions are already in use, if you like. These questions are already coming up because we have surrogate motherhood. Okay, we have surrogacy. You have a lady who is not able to carry a baby. She has eggs, but for some reason, she's not able to carry a baby. There's a problem with her uterus. Either she has recurrent miscarriages, or for whatever reason, she can't carry a baby to term. So there are people who act as surrogate mothers. In effect, they're incubators for this baby. So you'll take a fertilized egg from this lady, from Lady A, and you'll put it into Lady B, and Lady B will give birth to this mother, to this child, and then you have all the arguments about going to hand it over. There's been numerous cases where there's been surrogacy cases signed, agreements of surrogacy, and then comes to the thing, there's something that you can't actually write into a contract, and that's that connection between a mother who gives birth to a child and they don't want to hand it over, even though they've signed it over that it's not their child, they're only acting as a surrogate. There's been a lot of those cases. But halachically, who's the mother? Is the mother the one who gave birth to the child? Or is the mother the one whose egg it is, whose fertilized egg was, after all, only placed in the incubator? Happens to be that the incubator was a human being, but it was an incubator. So you could argue that the mother is the one that gave birth to the child. That mother carried the child for 8.5 months and gave birth, went through labor and all the things that I don't have to tell you, ladies, what all that entails. Gave birth to this child. Is that the mother? Or is the mother the one who's got that DNA connection? You know, you see a child, your own child, and you see as a child grows, you see that child with all its glory, its good points, its bad points. You usually see the good points of your wife and the bad points of yourself. That's how it works. But you see it. You can see it. This is my DNA's in there. I can see my personality. I can see my effect, my genes having an effect on that. How can you say I'm not the mother? Okay, I didn't give birth to it, but I'm the mother. So there are halachic questions on this. And there, not surprisingly, are a number of different opinions. The majority of poskim say that the birth mother is the mother. There are a minority that say that the genetic mother is the mother. And there are a not inconsequential number of poskim who say that there are two mothers, and that this child is obligated in kibbud aim, in honoring the mother, to both of them. And presumably, therefore, the laws of yichud would not apply because there would be a mother if it was a male child. So these are questions where we're talking about halakha. Now, what Rabbi Wise was talking about is something which is very, very close to my heart, and I do want to hear his presentation on this on another day, and that is worshipping halacha as opposed to worshipping Hashem, because I strongly believe that we are guilty of that to a very high degree on many occasions. We are slaves to the minutiae of halacha on occasions, and we forget what the bigger picture is. And that there is a danger of that here. But when you're talking about things as basic as a human relationship between a child and a parent, these are things which you can't throw in the mix. You can't go to AI and say, give me an answer, for the exact reasons that Rabbi Weiss talked about earlier on. Because that AI cannot get that human connection. That AI has never experienced what it's like to see a child born. To see a child born and take its first breath and its first cry, and to see that mother immediately fall in love with this little useless thing that's there that she says is absolutely gorgeous. It could be as ugly as sin. Doesn't matter. To that mother, that is the most gorgeous thing she's ever seen in her entire life. And the love from that mother to that child is boundless from the first second that he's born. No AI can take that into account when giving halachic decisions. And so, as Rabbi Jakubowicz said 30 years ago, probably or more, that not yet, and we're not there yet, we're a very long way away from it, because we have the techniques, we can do it, it's all there. You can grow a stem cell. I dare say, I'm not convinced at all that there's aliens, by the way, but I am convinced that there's some lab somewhere, probably in Israel actually, who's got a little cloned human being somewhere, locked up in a cage, you know, that's already been cloned. I joke, but I don't think it's far away. But we have to be very, very careful, because there's a danger, like, you know, when you first ride a bike, and if you remember when your dad was holding onto the back of the saddle and you're pedaling away there, and you just got it, and you're pedaling away and you can't hold on any longer, and he lets go, but you haven't quite worked out how to work the brakes. Okay, so what happens is you go faster and faster and faster, and you fall off, and you skin your knees, and you go crying back to your daddy, and you think, I'm not playing with this thing anymore, it's dangerous. And that's the same thing that we've got to be careful of with these techniques. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that we shouldn't advance in technology and we shouldn't advance in medical technology, because these techniques, artificial insemination, which was the first of the assisted fertility techniques, then ICSI and GIFT and all these different things, IVF, 1978 was the first IVF baby, Louise Brown in Oldham. That was hailed as the most miraculous thing. Anybody know how many IVF babies have been born in the world since then?
The first IVF twins in Belgium.
So tens of millions of babies have been born through IVF throughout the world. Right. No big deal anymore, is it? Right. Remember the first heart transplant? Any of you old enough to remember Christian Barnard? Yeah, yeah. What was that called halachically? What did Reb Moshe Feinstein, we mentioned him earlier on, Reb Moshe Feinstein, the greatest posek of the generation. He was right at the peak of his powers then in 1967. What was his halachic ruling on heart transplants in 1967? Double murder. A double murder. Murder of the donor, because you took out a heart that was beating, and a murder of the recipient, because there was no way this thing was going to work. It was an inevitability that it would fail, and you were shortening this person's life by giving him this heart. Double murder, he said. And along came very clever human beings a year later in 1968 and created something called brain death. brain death. Brain death did not exist until 1968. They brought out, and it was a place that some of you may have heard of, a place called Harvard. Okay, the Harvard criteria for brain death, and that was a completely and utterly artificial set of rules to decide that a person, when his brain stem is no longer working, he's dead. Because up until that moment, up until 1967, when Christian Barnard did his first heart transplant, a person was not dead until his heart stopped and he stopped breathing. Okay? If your heart stopped and you stopped breathing, I'm not talking about for a few seconds, if you can't be revived. If your heart stopped and you stopped breathing, you were dead. If your heart was going and you were breathing, even if it was artificial breathing through a machine, an iron lung, let's say, those people that had polio back in the day had these iron lungs, the first type of respirators, you were alive. Along come the doctors in Harvard and say, oh no, you can be dead and still have a beating heart. How's that? Well, we need you to be dead and have a beating heart, because otherwise we can't do heart transplants, because it would be murder. So they created this whole thing called brain death. And now, even halachically, not everybody, but with each passing decade, there is an increasing number of rabbis who accept the concept of brain death using various criteria that they bring from the Gemara, etc., etc. There's an equally vociferous group of rabbis who oppose the concept of brain death. For example, the London Beth Din, not known for its lenient rulings, the London Beth Din do not hold by brain death at all. Okay? If you were to go and ask the London Beth Din, can you do a heart transplant? They would tell you no, because it's murder. Okay? The Israeli chief rabbinate, on the other hand, do hold of brain death. So these are the halachic conundrums that we have just from 1967 onwards. And what did they do? In 1968, they made it all up. They made this new thing up called brain death. And yet, with the benefit of brilliant halachic minds, they can find reasons and opportunities to make it okay. Not everybody, but there are significant, very serious poskim, not lightweights, talking real first division guys who hold that brain death is okay. And these are all completely made up. So how does that work? How it works is that if there is enough halachic will, then with appropriate people, and you have to have the appropriate people, you can't just bring in any old person that just knows. You couldn't bring in an AI to do this. You have to have this halachic experience, and you have to have this neshama, you have to have this connection to the Torah and the connection to humankind to be able to do it. And yes, you can do it. And I'll tell you something else. There's all sorts of other halachic conundrums that if they put their minds to, they could sort out like that, like the aguna problem for a start off. But we're not going into that. So I have now used up my 30 minutes as well. So the bottom line is we are progressing in a rapid way. And what we need to do is to, first of all, slow down and remember that we celebrate Shabbat by not doing everything that we can do. Just because you can do it doesn't mean that you should do it. So that's number one. And number two, we need to get together the greatest halachic minds, lock them in a room, bang their heads together and say, sort it out, because that's how we make progress. And ultimately, they had no choice. And ultimately, in another 20, 30, 40, 50 years, the people who don't hold of brain death will be lone voices, because we can see that the halachic opinion is moving in that direction. I wrote once, I'll finish with this. When IVF first came out, though I have a book of medical questions and answers. And I'm not going to tell you the rabbi's name. A very famous rabbi wrote in there that IVF was completely forbidden. And this was very shortly after 1978. Completely forbidden, and he gave a whole load of halachic answers to it. Well, we know today, don't we, that IVF is accepted almost across the board as being halachically accepted. So I wrote to him. I was just being a bit naughty, really. I wrote to him and asked him if he still held of what he wrote in 1979. I didn't get an answer, as it so happens. Surprise, surprise. But I wanted to point out that I wasn't really being just doing it lahachis. I wasn't really doing it just to wind him up. What I wanted to know was how the halachic process had changed, because clearly he must today hold that IVF is okay. Otherwise, he's a completely lone voice. And I want to know, I would have loved to have got into his head to know how this halachic process developed from being completely asur to being completely accepted. Because if it can be done with IVF and it can be done with brain death, then it can be done with all sorts of other things if there's a halachic will. So there's our little trip into the future of halacha through AI and aliens. I still don't believe in aliens. And futuristic fertility. You're all invited now into the sukkah. If there's a whole load of refreshments there in the kitchen, if you'd like to take them into the sukkah, we can say some brachot.
And was my rabbi for and I was also very close with him. He was my go-to person when I was chaplain for many years. Calling him. Day or night.
Good, then we just sit around and have a drink of Halachic, that's all. It's fine. I think we'll close this down now. Okay. Oh dear, that's